Afternoon, everyone. We'll make a start. So afternoon, thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and welcome to one of our Sharing Leading Practice events. So those of you who haven't joined one of these before, our Sharing Leading Practice events are an opportunity for schools within our Challenge Partners network to share areas of expertise. And whilst we recognise that nothing will ever quite beat going to visit a school in person, these have been a really valuable opportunity to share best practice the length and breadth of the country. And we've run quite a few over the past few terms, and we're hoping to run a lot more in this half term as well. So just before I hand over to Shalina, our host, I just wanted to whiz through just a bit of housekeeping very quickly, if that's okay. So first of all, if you haven't already, please do mute yourself. It just helps to prevent any background noise. And do feel free to add any comments and questions in the chat as we go along. As we are a smaller group today, do also feel free to unmute and ask any questions directly to myself or Shalina if you prefer that as well. If you haven't already, please do also change your Zoom name to your first and last name. It just makes it a little bit easier to record attendance as well. And just to let you know that we are going to be recording this session, just to share with anyone who's not able to attend this afternoon. And I will be sending around a feedback form at the end of this as well. But for now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Shalina Patel. Shalina is in charge of the teaching and learning at Claremont High School, and Claremont is the lead school in our Chrysalis Hub. And Shalina's actually already done a lot of work for us at Challenge Partners, and some of you may well have already joined some of our Sharing Leading Practice events run by Shalina when she's been talking about diversity in the curriculum, which is a topic she's done a lot of work on. And I think recently has been on radio shows and podcasts in The Guardian and all sorts. She's been pretty busy. So we're absolutely delighted that she is here to share yet more of her expertise on Microsoft Teams and some tips for using that, both teaching virtually and also within the classroom as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand over to Shalina.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Georgina. Okay, so I'm hopefully going to share my screen and I'm hoping that you can see. Well, brilliant. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Shalina Patel. As Georgina said, I work at Claremont High School. It's just for some context, it's a very large secondary school where we have students from year 7 all the way through to year 13. I teach every year group as well from 7 to 13. So I have lots of practice of using Teams, obviously, with students ranging from those between those year groups. So I'm obviously going to address the elephant in the room, which is we're going back to school sooner than we thought. So I was just saying to Georgina actually that we've just got an email from our head teacher about the fact that we're going to have a staggered return. So we are actually going to be using Microsoft Teams even I think that week of the 8th. We're planning not to have all of our students in until the Friday, until the 12th, I don't think. So just FYI, obviously, if you haven't been given that information yet, from your school, you may be using Teams for slightly longer than you think you are, if that makes sense. So obviously this was planned on the assumption that we weren't going back on the 8th actually, but what I will be doing during this session is relating all the things that I'm saying about Teams to how we can be using some of these things when we get back to the classroom, and possibly if we do obviously go back into a lockdown or whatever. So basically, today's session is divided into 3 parts. So the first session is looking at our whole school approach when it came to teaching and learning via Microsoft Teams. I'm then going to be talking about what things within Teams we've been using to maximise impact when we're looking at students' progress. I'll be relating as much as I can to the real classroom, and then similarly, the final bit will be looking at sort of programs and platforms that we've been using. I'm really aware of the fact that there are so many of these programs and platforms. So I'm just going to tell you about 3, which I will explain when we get there. So that is what the session is going to be like. As Georgina said, feel free to unmute yourself and ask me questions. I will pause in between each section for any kind of questions and reflections and that sort of thing. So this beginning bit, I suppose, is more relevant immediately for the next sort of couple of weeks or so, whereas I think the second and third part will be things that we can move into the real classroom. So the first kind of question or provocation is, why did we rebrand from live lessons to scheduled lessons? So when this latest lockdown started, and we obviously started remote learning fully from in January, those first few days of live lessons, I think the feedback that I was hearing from staff at all different levels was that they were just completely exhausted by remote learning. And so we had been, the teaching and learning team and I, we'd been we've been using the terminology of live lessons a lot. And we decided to have a big rebrand. It felt like New Labour 97 sort of thing. And we had a big meeting. We had a day off for the students whilst they were getting on with kind of screen-free time, and we got everyone together. So I'll explain about that. How we supported staff and what do our students get over our 2-week timetable. So as I said, those first few days, I was just kind of horrified by the feedback that I was getting from staff, which was just, they were just exhausted. I think if we all think back to what our live lessons were like in January, I think we could all agree potentially that actually we were all talking too much. Basically, we were talking way too much at the students, making up for the fact that we couldn't necessarily see what they were doing. And so we had a remote learning rebrand. We changed our language from live lessons to scheduled lessons. And I think with that rebrand, there were lots of things that I'm going to go through with you now about how exactly we did that. So in our school, our timetable didn't change. Everyone was following their normal timetable. And our kind of golden rule was that just as you would greet your students at the door, we wanted everyone to start their lesson as a meeting, as a Microsoft Teams meeting. And the idea behind that was essentially just to help parents as well with making sure that students were following their timetable. But what we made it really clear to staff was, you do not have to be in that lesson speaking to the students the entire time. We had a lot of queries as well from teachers about how can we make sure that everyone is really engaged from the very beginning of the lesson. So one of the ideas was, I'm sure you've kind of done this sort of thing in lessons, is to play the lottery. So making sure that you might contact a student separately to kind of give you for them to give your feedback, for them to give you feedback on the starter activity, for example. We really wanted to be really clear that at the beginning of the lesson, we want everyone to engage the student in something really productive. But what we wanted to make really clear to people was, it is not, you do not have to be lecturing the students. And I loved that quote that I got. This is not my quote at all. It was a quote that someone told me. The idea that Microsoft Teams is not a live streaming service. It's a platform. It's a platform for many things. So that's kind of the key thing, really. So what we kind of came up with our staff was, here are the different types of remote lessons. So the first one is what everyone was doing anyway. So you're there the entire time. It's a classic live lesson. You facilitate activities, and it's like it's like you're in the classroom. And our expectation for our staff was that 50% of their lessons should be this kind of lesson, where students are there the entire time, you're there the entire time. But what we realized was, if everyone does this every single day, especially if you've got a 5-period day, it's just not gonna work. So what we said to people was, 50% of your lessons need to be this kind of lesson. And then I made up names for different types of lessons that everyone was doing anyway. So the top and tail lesson, which I'm sure might be familiar to all of you, you just don't call it that necessarily. So I did this twice today. So, just like with all of our lessons, you greet the students, you have a starter activity, and then in the middle of that lesson, they will be doing something. And for us, the real clear thing for us to make it clear to our staff is that what they're doing in that 30 minutes needs to be really clear to the students. So there's an example of a screen grab from my A-level Crusades lesson with Year 12, where they had 30 minutes to complete these questions, etc. And then at the end of that lesson, I then spent 10 or 15 minutes at the end going through what they had done in that 30 minutes. So top and tail lesson means that you've got that 30 minutes to answer questions, to do some marking, or do those things you do in your classroom as well, which you wouldn't be looking at the students the entire time. So that was the idea behind the top and tail lesson. This one has been really popular at school as well, the hello goodbye lesson. So similarly, you greet the students, you say hello, you do your starter activity, and then you wave them goodbye and they do something. And again, what we were finding, and we were finding this a lot with feedback from students and from parents, was that, again, they were being talked at too much. There was, not enough potentially screen-free time. So the idea behind a hello goodbye lesson was the idea that when you wave goodbye, they don't necessarily need to be looking at a screen. They could be listening to a podcast, for example. They could be writing or reading an article. They might be reviewing their learning, or a creative task that gets them outside, etc. I know that the German department did this great activity where they got the students to write their favorite words in German in the snow, for example, you know, and take a picture of it. Just, you know, hello, goodbye, just away again. If you've got a 5-period day, just that idea of, you know, if you set up an activity really clearly for the students, they can be getting on with that, and then you can be doing what you need to do. Similarly, to the hello goodbye lesson, you've got the exit ticket lesson, which I know lots of our staff have been using. So essentially the same thing, you greet the students, as always, you take the register, and the students get on with the task, but the final thing they will do in that lesson is you just set them a short forms quiz. I'm going to be talking about forms quizzes later on as well. And it basically works as like an exit ticket. So you might have 5 really simple questions that the students wouldn't be able to answer unless they'd done the work. It's a great way of just making sure that the students have done the work that that you've set them up to do. So that is the exit ticket scheduled lesson. Again, something that is not rocket science, but I think something that staff really appreciated. I think the key thing really was staff appreciated knowing that they could do this. I think that was the thing in the beginning of January. I think so many staff were so paranoid that they had to be present in the lesson the entire time. I think that comes partly from perhaps being paranoid about parents listening in and feeling like they had to fill the silence all the time. And this, I know, really just helps staff with kind of understanding that, look, we want to emulate the classroom experience, but also understand that there's a balance that needs to be done here. And then finally, the final sort of lesson prototype that we came up with was the self-guided scheduled lesson. So students really like this one, actually. The idea behind this is a flipped lesson. So essentially you start your lesson, and I love this one. You start your lesson with your camera off and your mic off. You just leave a PowerPoint with instructions on that they can go through. And then they lead the learning for the beginning, let's say 20 or 30 minutes. You give them some time, obviously. Or it might be that you say, right, you now have 30 minutes to do this, join the meeting back at this certain time. And then they then join you for the last bit of the lesson. You go through what they would have done. So it's kind of a goodbye hello lesson, I suppose, in a way, where they're doing the work at the beginning of the lesson, and then you come back and you consolidate at the end. So again, I know that this has worked really well with sixth form students, for example, by kind of, you know, they will then come to that last 20 minutes and you can go through any misconceptions and test them on what they've done, etc. So really, really good for, I think particularly good for small, like I said, A-level groups. If you've got a smaller class, this can work really, really well. So a few other things that we've sort of are our non-negotiables, I guess, when it comes to remote learning. I'm sure you've all seen the horror stories of, you know, people being given Teams links and joining lessons where they're not meant to, etc., etc. I'm very pleased to say I've personally not experienced that at all, but that is because of the meeting settings, obviously making sure that that's really clear to staff. We've also been pushing the idea of having a holding screen. So just like your regular lesson, you know, the beginning of your lesson will have a really clear PowerPoint, the title, you know, any reminders, you know, really clear activities, because as we know, the beginning of a remote lesson can often take about 5 minutes for everyone to actually get there and, you know what they're doing, etc. So I think having that remote routine is really, really important for us as well. And one of the final things that we was part of our rebranding was just reminding people about the basics, really, because we were very aware of the fact that there was some staff that won't have used Microsoft Teams at all in the previous lockdown, or that were new to the school and therefore didn't necessarily have a clue about what they were meant to be doing. So the key messages that I kind of gave to my staff was you need to do a mixture of all these different types of scheduled lessons, and not to do that classic live lesson every single hour of the day. We wanted to be mindful of the students' day as well, so being mindful of kind of cutting the kind of the end of your lesson a little bit short so they can have a bit of a break in between. We wanted to make sure also that students weren't getting too many assignments at the same time, and that there was flexibility with deadlines, especially for us. We've got students that are sharing laptops, etc., with their siblings and don't have access to it all the time. Live PowerPoints I will talk about more next, because it's been a real game changer for us in our school. We've also had non-negotiables in terms of making sure that every slide has a timing on it for those inevitable times when Wi-Fi goes wrong, or if students are watching back your lesson. So we've made sure that everyone records their lessons as well, so that students can go back. And yeah, we've been using breakout rooms as well, which has been so helpful for Microsoft Teams lessons as well. So yeah, lots of things that we've been doing. So that's kind of the basics of the kind of teaching and learning side of things. But of course, hand in hand with teaching and learning goes the behaviour for learning as well. So we had this really clear guidance for our staff in terms of what the expectations are. So making sure that there's a background, for example, on your if you've got your camera on, so that the students can't see into your house. That my sixth form are obsessed with looking into my background in my lessons. So just having a fake background is always helpful. I've actually been getting the students to choose where I go every week, and then we've been changing the background. You know, things like obviously taking, you know, making sure you're doing the basic things, taking register, scheduling your lessons, all that kind of thing. But of course, whilst teachers need to have that guidance, so do our students. So our students, some of this language might not make sense because it's very specific to our school, but there was a remote learning behaviour for learning policy. It was sent out to the parents and to students as well, and referenced by form tutors every week to really reiterate what our expectations are. I think it's been really, really helpful in making sure that there isn't any sort of silly behaviour. I have to say, in our school, we've been very lucky that students have just been amazing in remote learning in terms of really contributing really positively. And like I said, certainly in kind of my understanding and within the history department, for example, we've not experienced any sort of difficult behaviour when it comes to remote learning at all. Partly, I think that is down to the remote learning policy. And again, students have been reminded about all of these things as well, especially things like using the chat box appropriately, because you can have a lesson where you can have hundreds upon hundreds of messages in one go, especially if you've got year 7, I've found. So being really clear on, you know, appropriate use of the chat box, etc., and all those kinds of things. And our students have been really, really, I think they've just learned how to do it now, but that's been really helpful, I think. A couple of other things before the next part is differentiation. Obviously has been something that we have been, because we have a wide range of students in our school, so we found immersive reader really helpful, because immersive reader will essentially it's a tool that can support students, because essentially it will read out the text. So if you've got something that's quite text heavy that some of your students might struggle with, they can use immersive reader to kind of help them with that. There's a really helpful YouTube link that kind of tells you all the things that you need to know about immersive reader. What we found, breakout room, so that a TA is in the right breakout room with the right students. We found that really helpful. You know, sending students directly differentiated resources, which obviously in the classroom, sometimes, you know, that can feel awkward, can't it, if you need to give a student a slightly different resource, whereas actually on Teams you can just, you know, you can message them separately about it. They'll be none the wiser necessarily that it's different to everyone else's. Using collaboration spaces, which I'll talk about next, has been really helpful with supporting students, and just avoiding clutter, being mindful that the chat, you know, again, that monitoring of the chat, it can go quite, sometimes if you're asking something, the messages can come quite quickly. That can be quite frustrating and difficult for some students, so just being mindful of that kind of within the behaviour for learning policy as well. And the key final things of part 1 essentially are these, which I know seems strange because we're going back to school soon, but we may be back on remote later. So I think the key things for me were, the key thing was not overwhelming stuff. I was feeling overwhelmed with the amount of things I was seeing of, use this in your lesson, use this and this, and I was just feeling like, oh my god, am I just being really boring and only using a certain things? But I think actually not overwhelming stuff, I think, is really, really important. I made it really, really clear that when that first Friday of remote learning, the students were given, as I said before, I think the students were given were set work to do that was screen-free time, and departments had the whole day, apart from when I was presenting about these different types of lessons, to map out their remote learning. Departments have been given flexibility to meet more regularly as well, so they're able to set work if there's a lesson on. So for example, today I started my lesson with I had a hello goodbye lesson with year 12. I said hello, we introduced the lesson, and they then got on with it whilst I had a department meeting. So, you know, giving departments that flexibility, I think, especially in the lead up to the 8th, I think it would be really necessary to remind staff that actually they have that flexibility to meet more regularly, to map out what is going to be happening when we get back to school, which, for example, my department did today. We've also been mindful to not overwhelm people. So we give tips, so my team and I, we give tips to our staff every Tuesday about teaching and learning because of the Tuesday alliteration, basically. So we have been every Tuesday given kind of one tip to our staff. This has either been in the form of an email, or today, in fact, from 3:30 till 3:40, I showed my staff some things that they can do on Insights, because we've got parents' evening this week, and it's really helpful. If you don't know anything about Insights, I'll be talking about it later. We've been encouraging our staff to share with each other what they've been doing, because that can, when people are in school, you know, people come swing by and say, oh, I did this with this class and this. What we've been encouraging people to do is to share examples. And we actually had a newsletter that went out to parents that was filled with just the most brilliant examples of what students have been producing during remote learning, which is so lovely. And it's just nice to showcase, you know, and also to minimize those voices in the press that are saying that we act as if we don't have school. It was really nice to be able to look through that a newsletter to the parents and see, look at all these brilliant things that are going on in school. And like I said, there's a fine line between sharing and overwhelming, I always think. So yeah, just being mindful of that, I think, is really, really important. So once a week, but I think giving people time and trusting in your staff, I think, is very important. So that is the end of the first part. I don't know if there are any questions, Georgina, or if I should move on to the next.
There's no questions in the chat yet. I don't know if anyone wants to unmute and ask any questions.
Feel free to unmute, otherwise I will move on to part 2.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, brilliant. So this part, I think, will be more helpful in terms of applying it to beyond March the 8th or 11th or whatever. So these are the features of Teams that we've been using to maximize impact. So I'll be talking firstly about remote feedback, and then I'll be talking about how we've been gauging engagement with Microsoft Insights. So this, I have to say, I think is, if you take anything away from what I tell you today, this, I do believe, it has been the single-handedly most, it's the most simple thing, but honestly, you'll see from the examples that staff in Claremont anyway, just ran with this idea. And I've just got a snippet from an email that someone sent me. OMG, that idea shows a game changer. That shows how sad we are in Claremont. But this is so simple, and I will be using it for homework. Moving forward, whether we're back in school, whenever we're back in school, I'll be using it. So I don't know if anyone else has been using this, but you can what I was reflecting on is the fact that I know that lots of people were feeling like they were feeling very kind of despondent about the fact that you can't, about the fact that when you're in a classroom, you can see the students writing in front of you. And I was getting that feeling that people were getting very frustrated with not being able to see what the students were doing. So this is what we have been doing over the last few weeks, and it has been incredibly helpful. So monitoring pupils' answers on Teams. So how can you set something up so that you can see what the students are doing? And I will preface this with, I am not going to be talking about OneNote. I don't like OneNote. I don't know if there are any OneNote fans in the house, but I can't get on board with it. I don't know if it's because I have a Mac, but I just can't deal with OneNote. But this, I think, is better than OneNote personally. So what you have to do is this. I was doing with year 7, they were barren on a budget because we were looking at attacking castles. So what you do, step 1, is you put together a PowerPoint with a question that you want the students to answer. So there is my very simple question there. You're barren on a budget, you can only afford one method of attack. What are you selecting and why? So this task was going to be at the end of a lesson where I had been teaching them about attacking a castle, obviously. All you do, you make a PowerPoint with the task at the top, and then you can see the green box I've covered, although you can see it was Megan, because you can see on the other side there. But, you basically just duplicate the slide and write the student's name. And this was a year 7 class, so I did do this 30 times, but it was worth it. So yeah, you put the student's name. So you make this, you just make it on, you don't make it on OneDrive or anything like that. You just make it on your computer. All you then do is you upload it into the chat during the lesson. So you upload it using that little paperclip. It then automatically, because Teams is genius, it automatically goes in your files as well, which is great. I had this first slide, find your slide, and the instruction is really simple. I uploaded it, it said year 7, right, find your slide with your name on and start answering the question. And I said, warning, I might start adding comments, so watch out for them. What then happens, which is amazing and so simple, the students start writing their answer. What is incredible about that is you can do 2 things. You can type on their answer. As you can see, I typed on Megan's answer. And then just as our students do in the classroom, she then added to her answer in purple text, which she would do in purple pen if it was in her book. What's great about this as well is that actually, because all students are looking at the same PowerPoint, but obviously looking at their slides, they then, I don't know if it's, student, they're so competitive. If I'm giving praise to someone, I think, Megan, really love that point you made, the students are then egging they're then in that competitive mode, and they want to really to kind of outshine each other. So you can give a mixture of kind of verbal feedback and also typing as well. I have used this with 7 to 13 and it has worked so well. And all I did with staff is I showed them how to do this in a briefing. And honestly, within 24 hours, I think I received all the examples that I'm about to show you within 2 days, because people just ran with it. So, and people, of course, did way more interesting things than I had done. So here's an example from a year 11 lesson. You can see that our teacher, Samana, she's had a conversation with the student there. They've also done some peer assessment where you've got the what, when, where's, and the EBIs in green pen as well. So you can really see that dialogue going on, not only between the teacher and the student, but also between the students themselves as well. So great example there. I loved this. This was one of my great friends in the German department. So again, she had the slide with every student's name on, but what she included was the success criteria. And then what she did was, while she was then going through each student's work, she actually just highlighted what they needed to do. So it was a really easy way for the students to know, okay, Miss has looked at my work, I now know I need to add this particular thing, for example. So simple. But again, really effective. Teachers don't call each other, right? This teacher called me on Teams after her lesson to thank me about the fact that she hadn't felt like she had got as much work out of her class at any other time compared to this. So I do think that is kind of a testament in itself. This was the learning support department. So they were actually the first people that I told about this, because I did think it would be really helpful for them in their smaller group. So you can see here, they've kept it really simple, just like the previous one, I suppose. They've got their kind of key criteria for the students, and then they were then writing their answers. The feedback, again, that I got from the learning support was that this was incredibly helpful, and they've been using it every day with their students, which is great. And of course, people, like I said, honestly, people just ran with it. So here was a great example from drama, where the drama teacher combined students together. And so what they had to do, so for example, let's say Shalina add to Georgina's slide and paired up students with each other in advance. So they were peer marking each other's, writing comments to each other. And then I loved this idea as well, where what they also did in that lesson, or maybe it was a different lesson, but they then actually got 2 students to write on the same slide. And what he actually did was he paired a student that maybe needed a little bit more support with a student who would be able to then help that student. Hence why there's a slight difference in how much they've written so far, for example. But I think so that is really, if we're thinking about, what is everyone always, when everyone's talking about remote learning, everyone's always saying, how do you recreate the classroom experience? That is recreating the classroom experience, isn't it? By having students working together on the same slide, helping each other, etc. I think it's so great. And like I said, I do think that I will be setting these kinds of tasks as homework when we get back to school. Just putting a document with all their names on that they can add to. You can then project it on the board when you're in the classroom with them. And it's just I think it's just a great way. So simple, 3 simple steps, but I think it's just a really great way. And as you can see, honestly, I haven't made any of these up. Obviously, these are from teachers in my school. I told them about it, and they just ran with it. So I do think that this has been incredibly helpful. A few other things that have changed my life in lots of ways. As you can see, I teach A-level history. That very cheery question there about Tony Blair's foreign policy in 2001-2007, absolutely horrendous content in there. But what I found so helpful is dictating feedback. So when the students have submitted an essay via Microsoft Teams, there's this little dictation icon, and it will write your text in black. I change it to pink or red. I've just found it really helpful. It saves time. It means that you can, I've just found it really helpful for lots of different reasons. But there's an example of how I have written dictated comments onto an essay. What you can also do is I have also done this, I've been so lazy and done this, where I've actually been marking something else that the students haven't submitted on Teams necessarily, but I've just had a blank Word document up on Teams with the dictation thing, and I've just said my feedback out loud and then copied it onto whatever the student, or emailed it to the students, which I've just found really helpful and useful and just saving time. So yeah, dictation, you don't just have to use it in that way. You can also just use the dictation function for sending emails and all kinds of things. So I found this very, very helpful. And again, for us, we have coursework at A-level, and we have decided as a department that we're going to get the students to upload their essays onto Teams from now on, so that we can use this dictation, because it's just so helpful for when we get back to school. So yeah, dictation, absolute time saver, and it's just been really helpful. So a few other things about what we've been using in Teams itself. So polls, we all love polls, of course. These polls, God, look, these are from the 4th of December. So I tell you, this was a week when year 11 were self-isolating. So all way back when in December, when we first started using polls, we were revising the Elizabethans, clearly. And that's when that's when we first started using polls. And we were just using them like this. We were loving it. The students were loving it as well. Great as a springboard for questioning, checking students' understanding. So for example, that recusants one, I had 5 definitions that I had on the slide, and they had to vote for which one they thought was the best definition. They all voted, most of them voted for number 3, for example. But what was really helpful is then questioning the students, obviously, on why did you say number 1, for example, etc. So we know that this is the simplest way to use polls. Polls are great, so helpful. We were using them at the beginning of December. We know this is great, but there's more. There's more you can do with polls. So following up on polls in future lessons has been quite helpful. You've probably noticed if you go on Microsoft Forms, all of your polls that you've done in lessons will appear on there. And what you can then do is it comes up with these great graphs that you can find. So for example, we've got here, you know, this was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Who do we think had the upper hand, for example? And you can use this, for example, in a future lesson, if you want to revisit how each student answered, and then maybe question them on whether they would still stick with that answer. Similarly here, so last half term, as you know, we're learning about attacking castles, etc. with year 7. So one of the questions I asked them in the lesson was, what was the most important part of the castle? This was before half term, so I'm planning to ask the students again this week whether they still agree with that, because they've been making some castle models and stuff. So yeah, you can actually there's lots of polls, Forms just turns the answers into really useful formats, I think. So again, I think it's really helpful for that as well. Forms quizzes. Now I know that forms quizzes are incredibly helpful, and so I'm not going to tell you how to make a quiz, because you all know that already, but I am going to tell you some things you may not know about forms quizzes. So first of all, you can add explanations for incorrect answers. So this is really, really helpful if you're doing a quiz at the beginning of a lesson, for example. So for example, with year 8, yesterday, we've been learning about the Mughals, and I just wanted to do a quick recap with them. So I set them a few questions, and what I made sure is that if a student got a question wrong, I explained why their answer was wrong. So that you don't get bombarded with, oh, but I thought that answer was correct. No, it's all there already for you. So helpful. And again, forms quizzes, I think, are here to stay. I know that in our school, we're really keen. We've been using Microsoft Forms quizzes since the first lockdown for homeworks, for revision and things like that. So this, I don't know whether this is a new feature or whether it's just a new discovery for me, but I found this really helpful. Just because it just alleviates, like I said, those questions, but also it's especially helpful if they're doing it at home on their own. If they're doing it at home on their own, they're getting immediate feedback on why their answer was wrong, which I think is really helpful. So that I found incredibly helpful, just using that little speech bubble thing there. Branching, right, I've forayed into maths for this example. So I am obviously not please, if you are maths and you know any of these are wrong, please don't tell me. I just use this as an example. So branching is so helpful. And I think I used a maths example because I thought that it was easiest for maths than anything else. And I think so basically what you can do is, question 1 is, this is about equations. Don't ask me anything more. It's about equations, let's say. So question 1, a student that got the correct answer, you can set it, and if you look at the next picture, if they got the answer correct and they answered 2, they're now going to go to question 3, which is a harder question. If, however, they said 16 or 5, which is incorrect, you can branch the question so that they then answer a similar question. And it's so clever. I think maybe I've made it sound more complicated than it is. It's so easy to do. And it just means, like I said, that branching means that that students who are getting it right, they're essentially answering less questions, or the challenge is being upped quicker. But for the students that are getting it wrong, you can keep asking them similar questions until they get it right, in theory. And it just means that rather than them getting it wrong and then nothing happening with it, they're then being asked to repeat that particular skill until they're getting it right. So branching, incredibly helpful. Again, I don't know if this is a new thing on Teams, but I don't think it is. I had never noticed branching before. So play around with branching if you haven't already. I think that forms quizzes are here to stay, even when we're back in school. So I think this is really really helpful. And when I sent this to the maths department, they absolutely loved it. So yeah, I think branching, incredibly helpful. Few other things. Obviously, we've got this new reacting thing on Teams that's appeared like yesterday. But I think, again, just really simple things you can do, asking students to show you a certain reaction for an answer, for example. Again, it's just mixing up question and answer, isn't it? But really, really simple. And then finally, for this part, insights. Now, I just presented to my staff at 3:30 about insights to remind them, because we've got parents' evening this week. If you have got any parents' evenings booked in between now and when we go back to school, I would encourage your staff to look at it. I actually, whilst I was doing this, I actually got a text from a drama teacher who said to me in capital letters, "Insights is everything. God, I'm going to be on there for hours," is what she's literally just messaged me, because it is so clever. If you've not seen Insights, you can add it to your team. You just click on the 3 dots, add Insights onto there. And you can use it to track pupil engagement. So things you can do. I will also say Insights, it lags and it's a bit slow. And the reason for that is because when you go on to, it's because Insights is pulling all of the information from your team and it's turning it into these graphs, etc. So it is a bit slow, just to warn you, but it's worth it. What is helpful about this? I had this up during Year 7 parents' evening, and was able to tell parents exactly how many times their child had contributed in their last lesson, and exactly whether their student was late, what time they got there. There's so many things you can do with Insights. So a couple of things to get you started. There's these, for want of a better word, there's these blobs. You can see the blobs are different sizes, and I've obviously covered the students, well, most of the students' names are. And what the blob is showing you is how much they contributed in that lesson. So it's really helpful to have up during parents' evening to just give you a quick insight. What's also great is you can click on something where it ranks their contributions. So again, really helpful for parents' evening when a parent is sort of saying, well, how have they been in remote learning? Oh, actually, they are in the top 3 contributors. Great. Actually, your child did not contribute once last lesson. You know, it was so helpful, so helpful. Just to say as well, if you as I said, I have received text messages from staff when I've reminded them about this today, but you can honestly spend ages, and it's so useful for classroom teachers to have a look. I actually have a quick look at the end of every lesson. So just to have a look, just to make I make a note in my planner of who contributed the most in that lesson and who contributed the least, and then I share that with them the next lesson. Just because then it reminds them that I can see everything, and it freaks them out a bit, but it's just really helpful. So that's what I've been doing, for example. But also what's really helpful is I find the assignments on Teams can be annoying because all of your assignments for every single class show up. So if you're like me, I teach 7 to 13. There's so many assignments on there. But what's helpful about Insights is it will take you to a tracking sheet essentially that shows you shows you the assignments for that class, which is what I have been waiting for. So it's really helpful. It shows you whether they viewed it, turned it in, returned it, whether it was late. There's so many helpful things about this. So I would recommend, if you have not looked at Insights, have a look at it. But also what you can do is you can actually drop down, like I did this with Year 13 today, where you can drop down and you can actually look between a certain period of time as well. So you can put in a certain week, you can look over across the month. You can drill down to the point where you can look at what time a student has accessed a resource, and you can stalk them to your heart's delight, basically. There's so many things you can do. So Insights, big fan of it. It is slow, I warn you, but it is really, really helpful. Another final discovery I made over half term, which I was telling Georgina about, and Georgina, they did do it, you'll be pleased to know. So I discovered over the half term that you can add a whiteboard to your team page. So you can see here, this is my Year 13 class, and it adds it to there. So my students, as you know, we were learning about Tony Blair and the 2000s. So one of the last things we did before the holidays, we were learning about the 7/7 bombings. And over the half term, I wanted them to watch a documentary about the 7/7 bombings. And I had said to them initially, just write down some ideas. And once I discovered this whiteboard, I was like, okay, I sent them a standard Year 13, we're going to experiment with something on Teams. And all I did was I added the whiteboard. I just said, after you watch the documentary, please just write a post-it with your reflection on. And I checked it during the holiday, and they had. So this is the first 6 people that had done it. And it just meant that during the lesson, I could then share my screen and we could just talk about the similarities between what they said. They could talk to me a bit more about the different things they said about it. So really, really helpful, I thought. And it stays there. It stays in your team. So, and it just means that actually, so something I did today, for example, is I made a different white. So my year 13s are doing a presentation next lesson, and they're in 3 groups. I've made a whiteboard for each individual group, so that they can post their ideas on there, so they can kind of collaborate. It's a collaboration space that they can use, but also I can see it, which is really helpful. So yeah, and you can just name them different things. So I think this is new, and I have found it really, really helpful, but I will be using it when we get back to the classroom as well. So I think it's really useful for homework. So again, even something simple like I've done, prove to me that you've watched this documentary by writing a note about it. If we were in the classroom, I would have this projected on the board, and I could obviously talk through different things, and you can just facilitate a discussion. I also think learning could be captured over time. So you could revisit old boards that you've got and see if they want to add anything to it, or if they've changed their mind. So yeah, I think the whiteboard, I don't like using the whiteboard there's a whiteboard option obviously during a lesson, which I just find very messy, and you kind of end up zooming in and out of it. And also the students just draw stuff, which even if they're in year 30. But I have found this for homework and adding it, because it's actually on the team. I think it's been really helpful. So that is part 2. We've got one more part to go. Georgine, has anyone got any questions about anything?
Again, nothing in the chat. I think you've been extremely clear. Again, I'll give everyone a chance to just unmute if anyone does have any questions or comments or anything.
Shalina, I assume that, hello, I'm Bernardo. I assume that you're using a different team for each one of your groups.
So what I've done basically is so each individual class has got their own team. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just trying to think how the practicalities of what you were doing with all those different resources. Yeah. That's
Yeah. So every single class has got their own team, but obviously you can make your own teams as well. So for example, I've made a team for my form, where we kind of share, where we use the whiteboard and share and collaborate on different things. We had a pancake day competition, for example. So yeah, there's lots of you can make your own teams, but yeah, we, as standard in our school, every class has got their own team, but you do also have the option to combine classes together. So we've done that with our year 13s, for example. There's a team with all of our A-level students in, which has again been very helpful. If we've got something that we want to say to all of them, we don't have to do it twice. So yeah, that's what we've been doing. No props. So the final part is, what have we been using in addition? Because obviously the last part was talking about the things in teams, but I wanted to talk about the absolute minefield of different platforms and programs you can use. Now, I basically thought the best thing to do was actually ask my staff, what have you found most helpful, and what have students fed back about what they found most helpful? So I'm only going to talk about 3: whiteboard.fi, Socrative, and Mentimeter. There are so many, and I could probably spend hours talking about different ones, but again, I wanted to keep it simple and just focus on the ones that we've actually been using. And also I wanted to, as I've done with everything today, I'm hopefully proving that we do actually use all this stuff. So whiteboard.fi, I don't know if you've been using it or not, but it is really helpful, and I have found it. I don't like the whiteboard within the Microsoft Teams whiteboard within a lesson. I find it quite messy, and also because there's only one whiteboard, students are kind of writing on top of each other, and it's just a bit of a nightmare. So using whiteboard.fi has been really, really helpful. If you've not seen it before, basically what it does is it just gives you a link, and what you can do on your whiteboard is you can add images onto it, which I'll show you different ways that we've been using it. And every single student has their own individual one, and they can't see each other's, which is so helpful when you're doing tasks. They can't look at each other, so you know that what they're writing is their own work, quote unquote. But you can obviously share your screen and show them each other's, but they can only see their own. So I wanted to show you, again, this was something I suggested to Claremont staff. Here's something that you can use. It's free. And within a few days, I was inundated with examples. So here's an example from MFL. I thought this was absolutely genius. You can see that the MFL department, they have copy and pasted the PowerPoint slide, And the students have done a listening activity, and you can see the students are kind of completing it. So really helpful. Again, that whole idea of us being paranoid as teachers is we can't see what they're doing. Are they doing this listening activity? Well, you know they're doing the listening activity because you can see them filling in their grid as they go along. So clever. Yeah, so clever and simple and straightforward. And again, I wanted to prove that you can use this with all types of students. So we've got some A-level economics, drawing graphs, we've got some physics going on here as well. Really, really helpful. But I wanted to show you that you can use it in every single subject, honestly. So MFL, we've got economics and physics. In English, for example, students you can write text as well, rather than having to obviously write, and then your handwriting ending up very illegible, like you can see there. But you can add text, you can type text as well. Really helpful. So again, also you can download these as PDFs. So you can download them as PDFs. And if you've done something really important, I've saved them as PDFs, and my plan is if there's anything really, really important that I want to go in the student's book, I'm just going to print it out when we get back to school and they can stick it in their book. I also upload the PDF to the team so that the students can see each other's answers as well. Drawing Marley's ghost, I love that picture. So again, you can use it as like a simple starter activity, or for a kind of a deeper activity with that one there. This was me talking about Blair again. So this was a lesson where the students we were learning about young people benefiting or not from Blair's policies, and the students have written a judgment. So they've done it in different ways. Some of them have marked their own. Sahil has given himself an A star, as you can see. But again, it's just so helpful to get them to do this, and then to just share your screen and just have a great conversation about it. So yeah, really helpful for history as well. But also we've been using it not just in lessons. So registration. What is one thing you're grateful for? Nikolai says her family. This is 13.6, my form. I asked them to draw how they were feeling in registration. We've got quite a mixed bag there of emotions in 13.6. But again, just, it was just a little bit of fun, but also actually really helpful for me to know, okay, who should I be worried about actually? And who do I maybe need to get in contact with outside of the form. So really helpful for not just in lessons as well. All of what I've showed you, all of this is the free version. There is, however, a paid version of whiteboard.fi, and this information here is from a science teacher. I received an email from one of our science teachers who was so over the moon about the paid version, because she just loved it so much, and she thought, you know what, I'm just going to invest in paying for it. And these are some of the things that she said. I won't go through it all, but what I think is genius about the paid version is you can invite other teachers to join. So if you have a TA in your lesson, it shows the TA with a different color mouse, so you can see what they're doing. Really helpful. It permanently keeps the boards as well, so the students can revisit it later on, whereas with the free version, it disappears. You can download it obviously as a PDF, but the actual board disappears, I think, after 2 hours. You can give feedback on the paid version as well. There's just lots of things that you can do with the paid version, basically. And what she emailed me basically saying, I am planning to use this all the time for homework, as a result of all the extra things you get from the paid version. So she has obviously sold it to me anyway. Thought it was really, really helpful. So yeah, whiteboard, that is whiteboard.fi. Last couple of things. So Mentimeter. Mentimeter is a corporate, it's a corporate tool that people use when they're doing fancy presentations and stuff. As you can see, I have been using it in my history lessons. So a few things that I have found really, really helpful. And again, if your students have access to tablets in your lessons, or if you allow them to use your phones, like, when you get students to use Kahoot and stuff, you can still do this in the classroom. I personally really love the word cloud one, because this question here was, I asked the students, can you tell me words that you associate with knights? Because we were learning about the military orders in the Crusades. And again, I would use this in the classroom with my sixth form, get their phones out. You can just send them a link, you can email them a link, and they can just add the answers on their phones. So I'm going to continue to use this, definitely. And I love the word cloud. I think it's so helpful to capture their understanding. I love this one as well. So again, this is, for me, this is like using a poll in a lesson, but so much better. I love this one as well, this strongly agree and disagree. which I use again with sixth form. With year 11, we were learning about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and we did a thing about the reasons for it, and then they ranked the reasons for what they thought were most important. I did have a tutorial with my year 13 form where we were discussing what type of eggs they like to eat, and every time I show this to anyone, they are shocked that no one said poached, and I agree with you. So yeah, I've used it in lots and lots of different ways, and I will be using it in the classroom. Like I said, if you have used Kahoot with your students, obviously Kahoot is a classic. If you use Kahoot for quizzes, it's the same thing. It will send them a link within the code, with like a number. They put in the number, it will then come up with the particular question. They can upload it, and then it will just appear. And what's great is how it looks when it's changing, when it kind of changes the answers as they're uploading them. So I'll be using this in the classroom for definite. And then the final thing is Socrative. And again, Socrative is something that we are planning to use when the students get back into the classroom. And again, I wanted to prove that we are using this with our students. So this is something from the English department. So Socrative, you can set up quizzes on there, and what's great about using it during remote learning is you can see the students answering the questions, which ones they got right and wrong, and you can feedback live. Again, you could send them the link during a lesson if they have a tablet or a phone on them, or you can set it for them to do for homework as well. This is great because you can address misconceptions immediately after they've done a quiz, or if they're doing it for homework, you can obviously address it in the next lesson. Again, what is so great about Socrative, and it's free, is you can really easily download the results. It will give you really great things like the class average. What has been really helpful for us is setting the students a quiz, resetting them the same quiz maybe 3 weeks later, or after half term or whatever, and seeing it will be alarming if their percentage goes down. Every time that the feedback I've got is the percentage has gone up every time. But yeah, you can see how they're getting better at it over time. So super helpful, I think. If a student is having a problem accessing the website, because we know these things happen, then they can do things. You can actually download the questions and send it to them, and then ask the students to just write the answers down. And they can then self-mark when you're back in the classroom, essentially. Sorry, also just when you're going through it in the remote lesson as well. So like I said, Socrative, we are definitely going to be using it for homework. We're going to be using it for revision, especially. Really, really helpful when we get back to school. So those were the three. So just to remind you, here we go. Just to remind you, I've only talked about Whiteboard, Socrative and Mentimeter because they were voted by my staff as being the ones they've been using the most. I have mentioned an honourable mention to Kahoot as well. There are so many, obviously, there are so many, and I personally have felt very overwhelmed with seeing people saying, oh, have you used this, and have you used Nearpod, and have you used all the other things, and I think the key thing for me has been not overwhelming staff with all these different things, and we have just found personally for us that these three, as you can see from the examples, I'm not lying about the fact that we've been using these. Yeah, so I'm sorry I've talked at you for such a long time, but that is all my wisdom about Microsoft Teams. And sorry for not mentioning OneNote. I'm just not a fan of it, I'm afraid. So yeah, that is, if anyone's got any questions or any thoughts, then please feel free to ask, and etc.
Thank you so much, Shalina. I'll just give everyone a few seconds just in case they do want to ask any questions at all. It doesn't look like it. I think it's been, yeah, as I said, just really, really clear. So obviously no questions are needed, which is really fantastic. Yeah, it doesn't look like we've got any. Thank you so much for doing that. It's been absolutely brilliant. I will also be stealing, even as a non-teacher, I will be stealing some of these ideas. I think I said this to you when we met last week. I think some of these could be really useful in challenge partners as well. So this has been really, really interesting. Yeah, we've got a few comments just coming in, actually, just saying, yeah, really, really helpful. Lots to think about when we go back to school and stuff as well. So thank you so much, especially for adapting last minute to think about, how this can be used in a few weeks' time after yesterday's announcement. It's hugely appreciated. Just everyone who's still on the call, I'm just going to pop a quick feedback form in the chat. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, that would be enormously appreciated. I will send through an email tomorrow as well, just with the PDF of the slides. And I think Shalina's very kindly agreed to share her email address as well. If you did have any questions or anything that you think you want to ask in a few days' time, then you've got that as well. But a huge thank you to Shalina for presenting with this. And thank you everyone else for joining, and have a lovely afternoon.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.